Hello everyone and welcome to day number 4 of the 2025 Isle of Wight Masters. This is the official recap proudly presented by Coatsi Chess, and today was round number 6. This is a fantastic game. There's a lot of value you will take away from this. And we have Vladislav Larkin from Ukraine, an international master. If you watched our interview with Vladislav, he actually won the first of 3 Blitz tournaments here at the Isle of Wight. And currently, as this recap is shooting, there is a second Blitz tournament on right now, so we will be conducting an interview with the winner very shortly. And Vladislav is playing Adam Dorrance, a FIDE master from Canada. So without further ado, let's get into the game. So Vladislav starts off with pawn to d4, we have pawn to d5 from Adam, and we have knight to c3, the Shigorin variation. We have knight to f6, bishop to g5, h6, Vladislav takes on f6, e takes, e3, c6. So already we can see from this position, it's already looking very symmetrical on both sides, and usually when you have a position like this and 2 masters playing right away, the game will slowly die down into a draw. There's not too much for both sides to play for here already when we look just based on the pawn structure, especially with this choice that Vladislav has gone for. But let's see how he tries to fight in this position and try and prove that he can come up with some kind of advantage. So we have bishop to d3, bishop to d6, and here we have queen to f3. So already here we can see that Vladislav is saying, okay, I'm looking to castle queenside because the queen has come off the back rank and it now allows castling queenside. This knight on g1 is mostly going to be developing to e2, and let's see how Adam reacts to this. So he plays h5, you can see now that this bishop's looking to come to this g4 square. This h-pawn gives control of this, so for that reason Vladislav plays h3, stopping this. We then have knight to a6 from Adam, which is a slight inaccuracy. The simple reason being is because in the game e4 was played, but bishop takes could have been played, and after b takes, you can see this pawn here on a6 and a7, they're both doubled a pawns. This c6 pawn is slightly backward, and because of this slight weakness you could now see before, when I was just talking about the position of how with the pawn structure it looks slightly drawish, well now you can see already that there would be some slight weaknesses in the position. So this is, some weaknesses that Vladislav can try and exploit in the middle game or the end game. And then after something like knight g2, this is just a sample line, g6, knight coming to f4, king f8, the black king is looking to hide here on g7, castles queenside, king g7, e4. You can see now we have a game of chess, but it's still going to be very interesting now, and now there'll be definitely more chances for the game to have a decisive result, especially with these weaknesses, because as they're slight weaknesses for black, but also it gives black this open b file we can put his rook, and since white has castled his king here queenside, it gives some slight chances to black as well as giving Vladislav a positional weakness to go after. So after knight to a6 in the game, e4 was played instead by Vladislav. He decides not to go for this knight takes a6, because also as well, going for this capture does exchange another minor piece, and with the minor pieces with one less off the board, obviously it's a lot easier for the other side to try and play for a draw, since the position will be more simplified. So we have e4, we have d takes e4, bishop takes e4, and I thought this was a great practical decision from Vladislav. Here he's looking to keep peace on the board. Obviously we can see slightly better and preferable would be knight takes. Now you hit this bishop right away on d6, and you also have a great knight in the centre of the board. But what Vladislav didn't like here was knight to b4 from Adam. This knight was once bad on a6, it comes to b4. You can see now it's hitting this bishop on d3, and for instance a sample line, knight takes d6, queen takes, knight comes d2, takes on d3, queen takes, g6, castles queenside, castles. You can now see how drawn this game looks. The only imbalance we have is we have this bishop versus knight. And with this slight imbalance, with the pawn structure, you can see we've got 3 against 4 on the king side and 4 against 3 on the queen side. It's very likely that this game will end up in a draw. And you can see how simplified the position already is after only 10 moves. So instead of that, a very nice practical decision from Vladislav. He plays bishop to e4 because now this knight to b4 doesn't come as a threat because it's not hitting the bishop. So after bishop to e4, we have knight to c7 from Adam. We have castles queenside from Vladislav, f5, hitting this bishop on e4, so the bishop has to retreat to d5. And now we have bishop to e6, and we have knight e2. Now you may wonder, well, isn't this pawn hanging? Well, no, this would be a horrendous blunder, because after bishop takes f5, you have queen to g5, simple tactics, and now this bishop has two attackers, it's only got one defender, and after king to b1, Adam would take the bishop and also take the game. So therefore, Vladislav played knight g2 instead, developing his knight. We now have queen g2 check, king to b1, stepping out of the check and getting the king to safety. And now we have h4 from Vladislav. You see from Adam, he's clamping down, gaining more space on the king side of the board. We now have rook hd1. This rook wasn't doing anything on h1, so Vladislav improves it to the center of the board. We then have castles queenside by Adam as well. And now we have d5, a very instructive point. Usually we see in chess that you want to develop all your pieces, and once all your pieces are developed to their most adequate squares, then we can start to push pawns. This is a very common idea in chess, and here we can see this, that now that all of white's pieces, we've got both the rooks in the centres, both the knights develop, the queen's on a nice square in f3, now it's time to push in the centre. So d5 comes, we now have knight takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, bishop takes f5, king steps out the check, bishop e4, takes, and bishop c5. Now we can see after this mass of exchanges, we can see now we only have queens on the board, two pairs of rooks, and two minor pieces. And once again, we have 3 pawns on the king side versus 3 of blacks, on the queen side against black's 3, and 3 in the king side compared to black's 3. With the only imbalance here being this knight versus bishop, you can see that, if anything, black is slightly better here, because here we have a case where in this open position, this bishop will be slightly better than this knight. So if anything, black is very slightly better in this position because of this. So let's see how Vladislav tries to fight for an advantage, or is this going to be a boring game? Most likely not, because it's in the daily recap. So f4, we have queen to f6, and now we have knight to c1. This knight Vladislav sees on e2, it needs to be improved, so he's looking to come to c1 and then to reroute the knight to d3. We then have bishop to f2. Now it's attacking the rook, and Vladislav decides to exchange a pair of rooks, and then play rook to e2 to keep his rook on the open file and attack the bishop. We then have bishop to g3, knight to d3, so this knight is now improved from the e2 square to d3, and now we have queen takes f4. Now you may wonder, has Adam just blundered his queen? Well, no, because if knight takes, we have a simple back rank checkmate, and that would be very embarrassing for Vladislav. So for that reason, we have queen takes on f4. Adam's going for this pawn up, but Vladislav will get this back very quick with the rook activity. So after bishop takes f4, we have rook to e7. You can see now that the rook's on the 7th rank, it's attacking this pawn on f7, and also this bishop is still under attack from the knight, so therefore a pawn has to be given back. So we have bishop to g5, getting away from this knight attacking the bishop. We then have rook takes f7, bishop f6, and now we can look at this ending. So once again now, we have an active rook for Vladislav on the 7th rank, so it's slightly better than black's rook, placed here on d8. And this bishop is doing a nice job of eyeing down this b2 pawn, but this knight in this endgame now starts to get a little bit tricky, because with pawns starting to become fixed like this, the knight can hop around, and as you can see already, it could jump here to g6 and attack this pawn, or come here to e6 and attack this pawn. Whereas this bishop, it can only attack pawns in the same colour of it. So for instance, it can only attack this pawn on b2 since it's a dark squared pawn. So let's see how Vladislav tries to play this endgame. First he goes for a4, creating a flight square for the king, and also as well looking to now move his knight, because now he can move the knight and not get back rank checkmated. So it's a good move. We then have rook to d5 from Adam, a great move as well, centralising his rook, looking to come over here to g5 to hit this pawn on g2. We then have knight to f4 from Vladislav. You can see now he can develop his knight, as there's now a flight square in a2. We have rook d1 check, king comes to a2, a5, now we have c3. You can see here that Vladislav's looking to blunt out this bishop, as obviously this rook's looking to come here to the 2nd rank and put pressure along this file. So Vladislav wants to prophylactically put the pawn on c3, blunting out this bishop, and then put the king on b3. So we can see this happens in the game. After rook to d2, the king comes to b3, and now there's no idea, like for instance, if the king was still on a1 and the pawn was on c3, the bishop could capture because the pawn would be pinned, it couldn't take back. So after king to a7, black also looks to improve his king and bring his king into the centre. That's what we should do in the endgame, improve the king. The king in the middle game, when the queens are on the board, it's a defensive piece. It wants to be hidden away behind the pawns, but then it becomes an attacking piece in the endgame because there's not as much danger of it being checkmated. So king a7, we then have knight to e6. You can see that Vladislav's now attacking this pawn on g2. We now have king to b6 from Adam, and a sampling that could have happened in the game. This pawn could have been taken on g2, and what would have happened in the game is knight c5 would have been played, now attacking this pawn here on g7 twice. We would have had rook to g3, knight takes b7, rook takes the h-pawn, knight takes h5, king b6, knight c4 check, king e6. And here would be a very interesting endgame. You can see this is now a complete race. Both sides have to be very accurate with their moves because black's got two pawns which are pass pawns. They can race down the board really quickly, and you can see that Vladislav in this case has three pawns against one, so he's going to have to try and create a pass pawn and push his pawns up the board. So it's going to be a very interesting fight here where it's objectively right now equal, but from a human standpoint and with the player's time going low in the endgame, it would have been very, very interesting to see what the result of this position would have been, because both players have to be very accurate. Especially, it's slightly more dangerous here for Adam because you can see that both his pawns are coming down the board. But instead we have king to b6, we have knight takes on g7, rook takes on g2, and now we have a very interesting position, rook f6, rook g7, and now we can see we go into a rook endgame. So rook endgames are supposed to be boring, but this one is very exciting and you will take away a lot of value from this. We can see rook to h6 comes on the board, and now you can see Vladislav is looking to capture this pawn. There's no way for black to defend it, but this is fine because after rook g2, rook h4 and rook h2, this is a theoretical draw. The reason is because despite white having this extra pawn, he can only push this pawn so far up the board, and if black knows the drawing technique, he will be able to draw this. So you can see if FIDE Master Adam Dorrance from Canada does know this. And keep in mind, a key point of this is that once this rook reaches the h8 square and this pawn reaches the 7th rank, black should have his king on a7 or b7, so he can shuffle back and forth between these two squares, where no rook check allows black's right to take and then this pawn to promote with check. If you can imagine that position, if the king's on a7, if a check comes here with a8 with a rook, black can simply take, and if white pushes his pawn up the board, black can simply capture. But if we had a situation where black didn't know this technique and this king was, say, on this square d6, you can then see how it would be winning for white, because rook can come to d8, checking the king. No matter where the king goes, then the pawn pushes. Black would have to capture, rook takes, and with the rook up, Vladislav would win the game. So, with that being shown, let's see how this endgame goes, and let's see how Vladislav looks to win this, as Adam, a very strong player, will know how to defend this theoretically. So we have rook to h7 from Vladislav, and we have king to c5. Already I think this is slightly going in the wrong direction. Simply, Adam can, if he knows this idea, he can just place his king on a7, and white can't really make any progress. He can just shuffle back and forth with the king. He'll eventually be able to try and trade off pawns on the king side, and with the rook behind the pawn, this will be a draw. But king to c5, objectively it's completely fine, but already I think it's slightly in the wrong direction for Adam. We now have rook to h5 check, king comes to d6, h4. So we can see that here, of course, Vladislav is not going to take this pawn on a5, because now after rook takes h3, this is a very simple draw, very easy. With a king and two pawns, this is going to be very easy to defend against king and 3 with the rooks on the board. Therefore, after h4, we have b6 from Adam, rook to h8, and king to c5. Already, once again, as I said, king to c7 would have been slightly preferable. With this setup, you can never see that black can infiltrate, and if he ever tries to come into the game, like so, especially with this pawn here, we can capture, and the black king can just sit back and forth, and if ever the king tries to come too far away, then we can try and exchange off some pawns. So, we have rook to h8, king to c5. Again, objectively right now this is drawn, but it's already starting to come in the wrong direction for him. Rook to h6, king to d5, king to a3, rook to h3, h5. You can see white slowly starting to push up the board. King to c5, black shuffling back and forth, king d5, h6, king c5, h7, rook to h1, king to b3. And here we have the blunder of the game. Rook to h2 from Adam. The reason now this is a blunder is that after we have in the game king to a2 and rook to a3, we see that a key point in this endgame is that black does not want to allow white to play the pawn to b3 when the rook is not on the second rank. So for instance, when pawn to b3 comes on the board, we want to be blocking this. And we'll see exactly this line. So you have king to b1, which was the only blunder in the game from Vladislav. And the reason is because here he can play pawn to b3. And this would be a winning move. And the reason is because now, when rook comes to h2, you can see that the king can step to the first rank. This is very important because if the king was on a3 and rook to h2 just was played by black, white has to make a move, and now white is in zugzwang, which would mean he'd have to push the pawn, we'd have an exchange of pawns, and then you can see the king can step down to c4, and this will be an easy draw. But instead in the game, we had, after king to b1, rook to h2, which was the blunder, we then had b3, and now white is winning. I just want to show you here this line. So rook to h1 came, and here, this would be the draw. So right here, Vladislav should have played b3 in the game to win with this idea. That now essentially the winning idea is that, as we said, when the rook comes to the second rank, like so, the king can step down to the first rank, and now no matter what, when you look at this position, this rook has to move. This king, as we said before, can never move out to the open file because we'll have a check with the rook and then this pawn will promote and it will become a queen. So with that, the king cannot move anywhere. You can see it can move nowhere here. And therefore, it's only this rook that can move. Because same again, if any pawn moves, let's say b5, we can take, and if captures, the same trick occurs. The rook can come behind and give a check and then push this pawn up. Therefore, the only piece that can move is this rook from black. And this rook can only stay on the h-file guarding this pawn. Because if the rook moves off the h-file, then the rook will simply move and the pawn will promote. Therefore, white can make improving moves, which is really amazing, and it's why this game is shown in the recap today, because I felt this was very instructive. You can see now that no matter what, the winning plan for white here, which is absolutely beautiful, the white king can move up the board nice and slowly. Black can do nothing for the reasons we just discussed. He can only move his rook, and the king wants to come all the way here to a6. Once it lands on h6, the rook can then move away from this pawn, threatening to promote. Black's got to take. We can give a check with the king's got to move back, white takes the pawn and he takes all of black's pawns on the king side, and with the extra 2 pawns this will be far too much for black. So a very beautiful idea as to how this is winning. And you can see already, as I mentioned at the start, this is why I really think that Adam should have put this king here on a7 and shuffled back and forth in this position, because here this wouldn't have occurred, and this is how he would have been able to draw the game. So with that said, king to b1, the reason it is now a blunder, and the only blunder of the day from Vladislav, is because with best play, rook h1, then if the king goes, let's say it goes king to c2, looking for this idea to come here to this a6 pawn, it doesn't work. The key point why is because when b3 is not being played, when the king comes up into the center, king can come to c4 because the b3 pawn doesn't control this square. Then it can come to b3 and gobble up the white pawns. So let's have a sample line of this. King d3, rook h3, king e4, the king's looking to come up, and now the key point, king to c4, why this would have now been drawn and why it was a blunder from Vladislav and why he should have played b4, because now obviously the king can come back. Obviously Vladislav would have realised this and most likely tried to shuffle to repeat moves. But now a key point is that if king to a2 occurred, we can see rook to h2, and this is the drawing idea. So if white didn't look to come king to c2 and come around, this is the key point, because black does not want to allow white to play b3. And if king a3 comes, looking to play b3, then this is fine. The rook can move to h1, and if b3 is played, then this is the beautiful drawing move, as I previously spoke about. Rook comes to h2, and now you can see white is in zugzwang. The only move, if white moves his rook anywhere, then this pawn can be captured. This king can't move anywhere because the rook does a great job of covering this second rank. And then this pawn's got to be moved, i.e. a simple line b4, takes, king c4, and this is a complete draw because now you can see that the rook can just endlessly check this king, and this pawn here is going to be taken, and black's pawns nicely shelter black from the checks. Therefore, that's why this is very instructive. So after king b1, rook to h2 was played, and this is obviously a blunder because it allows b3 when the king is not in zugzwang. And now, no matter what, white king can slowly improve, coming to this a6 square, no matter what black does, and we'll see this in the game. So rook to h1, king to c2, you can see the king walk is starting, the king walk of dreams, a very, very beautiful move. This is from Vladislav, and this must have been very pleasurable being able to play a position like this during the game. Rook to h3, you can see Adam's trying to stop the king from coming over, but he can't, no matter what. King comes to d2, rook h2, because the rook has to move from the h-file. Now the king improves. You see the king slowly improves up the board. Slowly, slowly, slowly. Again, the pawn on c3 can never be taken because then obviously the rook can move and this pawn is going to promote next move. So we have rook to h6, king b7, rook h3, king a6. You can now see the king has had the walk of dreams coming from the b1 square to a6, and now this plan is perfectly executed, and now the white rook can be moved from the h8 square. We can say rook to h4, and finally the beautiful move, rook to g8, because now white is threatening to push this pawn to make a queen, so black has to capture it, and after rook g5, king d6, now you can see white's completely winning, as he was from move b3, because now the whole of the black kingside pawns are falling. King takes b6, rook h8, king h5, this is obviously now completely lost. 2 pawns up for Vladislav. This is easily convertible, rook to b8. It's an accuracy by the computer, but it's already lost. We've got b4, king c7, b5, rook e8, king b4, and you can see 2 pawns is too much. And in this position, Adam Dorrance, FIDE Master Canada, resigns the game, and Vladislav Larkin from Ukraine has a brilliant game. And I thought this was a beautiful game to show in the recap. It looked like it was going to be very drawn, and you can see this very instructive point of why you need to know your endgames. Even someone as strong as Adam, a FIDE Master, wasn't able to defend this, and simply as I said, going with this idea of putting the king back on a7 and shuffle it back and forth and being slightly passive is what you want to do in this endgame to defend. Because with the king on c5, he had to understand with little time this idea of only playing rook h2 to stop the pawn push, and if the king's on a3, then to play the rook to 7th rank when white is in zugzwang. A kind of deep point to be seeing when you have little time on the clock, but that's why the simple idea is just shuffling the king back and forth. But just to show you a sample line, if there's some slightly less strong players watching, how this game would conclude would be rook to 8, rook c5, going after this pawn, takes, and now you can see 3 pawns. The pawns would just push up the board bit by bit, and then we'd have a queen, and obviously with queen and rook, this would be a checkmate. So guys, I really hope you enjoyed this game. This was very enjoyable to record today. This was a very nice game and very instructive. I really hope you took some value away. This was round number 6 of the 2025 Isle of Wight Masters. I hope you enjoyed this official recap today, and please come back to join tomorrow for round 7 and 8, the last double round of the day on Saturday before our final round on Sunday, which is a single round. So tomorrow's going to be really interesting. There's going to be some great games. I really hope you've enjoyed this recap today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.